Imagine a city so revolutionary that it promised to redefine urban life forever. A place without cars, without pollution, without sprawl. A city stretched out in a single straight structure through the Arabian desert. That was the vision behind the line. A mirror-clad megastructure in Saudi Arabia's NEOM project. For years, the world watched in awe. Could humanity truly build a linear city nearly 170 kilometers long? A city powered entirely by clean energy, home to more than 9 million people in the middle of the desert? But today, that ambitious dream has taken a dramatic turn. Reports of halted construction, shrinking plans, massive budget corrections, and unexpected political friction have sent shockwaves through the global engineering world. Has the line failed? Are we witnessing the collapse of the most daring megaproject of the century, or just a recalibration? To understand what happened, we need to look at the original idea. The line was designed as a narrow city, only a few hundred meters wide and up to 500 meters tall, stretching across the desert like a futuristic blade. Residents would move using high-speed transit buried beneath the structure, ensuring that no trip exceeded 20 minutes. The city would run on renewable energy, use artificial intelligence to manage daily life, and rely on vertical layering instead of horizontal expansion. In theory, it promised maximum efficiency, minimal environmental impact, and a completely new way of living. But transforming that vision into reality came with a list of challenges longer than the city itself. Engineering limitations, economic pressure, geopolitical tensions, and internal government decisions all converged, and the line began to shrink before construction even reached its first milestone. The first warning signs appeared quietly, long before the global headlines. Engineers working on the early excavation stages reported extreme technical challenges. Building a continuous structure hundreds of meters tall across shifting desert terrain proved far more complex than originally assumed. Geologists pointed out that parts of the planned route crossed zones with unstable ground conditions, requiring deeper foundations and dramatically higher costs than expected. Then came the financial pressure. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 relies heavily on diversifying the national economy beyond oil, and NEOM was meant to be the crown jewel of that transformation. But as global economic conditions shifted and oil revenues fluctuated, the enormous price tag of the line became harder to justify. Originally estimated at around $500 billion, internal reports suggested that real costs could escalate to well over $1 trillion. For a project expected to generate limited short-term returns, this triggered concern within the government. At the same time, international investment, once expected to pour in, did not materialize at the pace NEOM officials hoped for. Major investors hesitated due to the project's massive scale, uncertain timelines, and the lack of proven technologies for a city of this kind. Companies waited, observing whether the project could demonstrate feasible progress before committing billions. But perhaps the most significant turning point was political. Saudi Arabia faced internal debates over the allocation of resources. Some officials questioned whether it was wise to invest such unprecedented funds into a single experimental megacity. Others pushed for a more traditional development strategy, focusing on expanding existing cities instead of creating a completely new one from scratch. Behind closed doors, a reshuffling of priorities began, and the line was no longer untouchable. By the end of 2023, rumors spread that construction had slowed dramatically. Workers on site confirmed that equipment stood still for days at a time. Something major was happening. In early 2024, the speculation finally became reality. Multiple independent reports confirmed that construction on the line had not only slowed, it had been significantly scaled down. Instead of the originally promised 170 kilometers, the first built segment would now be only a few kilometers long. Some estimates placed it at roughly 2 to 3 kilometers. Others suggested even less. For a project that once aimed to house over 9 million residents, this reduction was staggering. Instead, the new plan projected fewer than 50,000 people in the initial phase, a fraction of the original population. The dream of a continuous megawall slicing through the desert was effectively paused. Only a limited pilot section would move forward, Why such a dramatic shift? The answer lay in several converging realities. First, cost control became an urgent priority. Building even a single kilometer of a mirrored megastructure hundreds of meters high required unprecedented engineering solutions. The steel demands alone were enormous. The energy systems, mobility layers, and climate-controlled environments pushed futuristic design into uncharted territory. Officials recognized that testing these concepts on a smaller scale was far more realistic than committing to the full length immediately. Second, global investors demanded proof. Many firms insisted on seeing a functioning prototype, real buildings, real residents, real operations. Without that, the financial risk was simply too high. Scaling down allowed NEOM to demonstrate feasibility before attempting a monumental expansion. Third, political pressure increased. With Saudi Arabia preparing major international events and investing heavily in sports, tourism, and infrastructure, the government needed flexibility. A reduced version of the line offered breathing room while preserving the overall vision. Despite the slowdown, officials emphasized that the line was not canceled, only adjusted, but the world understood what this meant. The ultra-mega project of the decade had hit its first wall. So where does the line stand today? In many ways, it is entering its most critical phase. The world has seen the glossy renderings, the futuristic promises, and the immense ambition. Now comes the test that every mega project must eventually face: reality. The scaled-down pilot will determine everything. Engineers will finally be able to test the multi-layer transport system, the energy-efficient facade, the artificial microclimate, and the dense vertical living concept. If these systems work on a small stretch, the door remains open for future expansion. If they fail, the concept of a linear megacity may never move beyond this desert experiment. Despite the slowdown, NEOM as a whole continues. Other regions, like Oxagon and Trojena, are still under construction. Saudi Arabia remains committed to transforming its economy, but the approach has become more cautious, more incremental, and grounded in demonstrable progress. For now, the line stands as a symbol of both ambition and limitation, a reminder that humanity's boldest ideas often collide with engineering, economics, and politics. Whether it eventually becomes a revolutionary city or a futuristic footnote will depend on what happens in the next few years.